Welcome to the Peer Review Podcast, Creativity and Fulfillment in Academia.
I'm Sarah Bunin Benor.
And I'm Mira Sucharov.
In each episode, we talk to fellow scholars, coaches, and other experts on topics related to finding meaning in academia.
But today it's just us. We're talking about a book by Maggie Berg and Barbara K. Seeber. It's called The Slow Professor, Challenging the Culture of Speed in the Academy. Since it came out almost 10 years ago, academics have been talking about it, and today we thought we'd get each other's takes on it.
So, Mira, what did you find useful from this book?
Well, so much. I mean, it taps into a lot of things that I've struggled with, and I imagine that's why people have been talking about it. It talks about pushing back on this need to have to line up publications. And I really notice this because every time I write a little bio that someone is going to say when introducing me when I give talks, I'm very aware of the number of articles and book chapters that I include. Mira has published over 35 academic book chapters and articles, and every time now I get an invitation to do another, usually a book chapter. We don't get invitations to write articles usually unless it's a special issue, but book chapters, we often get invitations. And I'm thinking, if I add to that when someone says my bio, that the number will have risen. And I really think this is what the authors are trying to push back on.
Oh, that's interesting. I don't give any numbers in my bios. I actually have no idea how many articles I've written. I mean, probably the last time I counted was when I went up for full professor. But I mention my books, and I think I say several articles or something like that. So I think that was definitely a big takeaway for me too. The idea that you shouldn't always be striving for more and more publications. What else? What are some other things you liked about it?
I want to get back to the research stuff. I should say that I think the reason I say over 35 articles is to make myself feel better about my H index. And that's the kind of thing that I had to look up when I went up for full professor. And I probably didn't even include it because I didn't like the figure there. And for those who are tuning in who aren't academics, it's a collection of data that represents the number of times you've been cited by other academics.
Hold on. How do you find your H index? I've never done that.
Well, now I'm envious of you that you've never spent an insomniac night looking up your H index. I think if you just Google H index, you'll find the platform, and then you'll plug in your name and you'll see what it is. And we can compare ours. I have a friend who likes to give me pep talks, and she's not an academic. And she said the other day, Mira, the only person you should be comparing yourself to is you, yourself. And I said, when I look at myself, I don't come out looking too bad. So, it kind of depends how you're feeling on any given day. One thing they say about teaching is how grading can really feel like drudgery, and that to try to overcome that, design assignments that are useful and enjoyable for the students themselves. And I really agree with this. But now here's Nancy negativity coming in with another anecdote. The other day, some news people came to my house to interview me for a brief piece on our Prime Minister Carney's call to Israel to stop starvation as a method of war. So they were setting up on my front porch, and the producer said that he had been a student in my class about 15 years ago. And it was great to see him. He's found a job in his field. But here's what he said. I loved the assignment that you designed for us. We had to write a policy brief. And I remember thinking, this is such a great assignment. As he said this, I was thinking about the Slow Professor book. And I was thinking, this is exactly the kind of assignment they would say is a good assignment to do. It's going to be more fun to write and therefore more fun to grade. And all I could think about was, can't do assignments like that anymore. AI can write a policy brief and easily get at least a B+, if not an A+.
Totally. It's a huge problem. But I also really liked that chapter and felt like it was saying things I already do. I have always done assignments that I think are useful and creative. But one thing that I took away from that chapter is that we should give students the choice of their own topic, something that they're interested in. So I do that. Some students have trouble with that because they like more um, direction in their assignments, right? But
Right.
a lot of students do appreciate it. And so I do give them ideas of what they could work on. For example, in my Intro to Judaism class, I do a debate for the final project where they have to choose a topic, and then with a partner, one argues pro, one argues con, but they choose a topic that they're interested in. So they could do abortion or something about vaccination mandates or circumcision, or they can do something related to Judaism in particular or some broader issue and look at how Judaism would respond to that.
So definitely something hot button, something that has relevance in everyday life, and then bringing in the religious doctrine. I think, yeah, that does sound exciting. It doesn't sound AI proof necessarily.
Oh, no, it's totally not AI proof. I'm going to have to change it this year. And I already noticed last year when the students submitted their scripts, they were just so much better than they had been in the past. And I
Uh,
think that's because of AI. So I think I'm going to tweak it that they have to do it unscripted.
mm,
Like they can have notes, but they have to really know it if it's going to be an unscripted conversation. And basically, I'm going to change most of my assignments now so that they are students interviewing each other. Because
yes.
if they're interviewing each other, then they can't use AI in the same way. They can use AI to prepare, which is fine. And I need to figure out what my new policy on my syllabus is going to say about AI.
Exactly. And so, look, we've skipped all the way to AI, which is one of the fastest technologies out there right now, or think something that enables us to be so fast. And here we're talking about the slow professor, and we don't know what they would say about AI, but it's really something to think about. The other thing I did love is how they suggested presenting your course as a story. And I really think that that would work very well for my Israel Palestine course. And I'm going to think about getting students invested in thinking about it almost as a plot based, a course with a narrative arc. So I think that might be a good takeaway.
That's great. I don't know how I would apply that in my courses, but it's definitely something I'm thinking about. But I do already think I'm going to add in more narrative into my teaching because, so much of good writing is storytelling. And I think
Absolutely.
that that's true in the classroom too. I do feel that students are more engaged if I'm telling a story or if one of them is telling a story. But also in that chapter, there was so much about how students need to be engaged and doing something rather than listening. And I feel like they didn't emphasize that as much as I expected they would. The idea that we shouldn't be the sage on the stage, we should be engaging them in conversation, doing activities in class that allow them to learn, to discover. But I think that's sort of implied.
Yeah, active learning is all the rage these days, and for good reason. And I agree, they didn't really focus on that a lot. It was more a philosophical idea of encouraging professors to be more creative and playful.
Yeah. But also, so much of what we do as academics is balance research, teaching, and service. And I think one of my methods for doing that is to not prepare for class until the day of the class. And that seems to go against the way that they were talking about it, being a slow professor in preparing for your teaching in a slow way and not in a rushed way and not like in the 10 minutes before class. But that, I mean, yes, I think we all should do that, but we have limited time. And if we're going to get as much done as I want to, then I feel like I can't spend as much time preparing for my classes as I think they would want me to.
Well, that gets back to the question of who is setting the quantity of output. Is it internally derived? So is it true to you? Are you being true to yourself when you set your goals, or are you even unconsciously responding to the neoliberal demands of the university, the corporatization of the university, external demands that they would seek to push back on?
No, I don't think I personally am at all because I'm a full professor. I don't have any external motivation to publish. It's all internal. It's because I have so many ideas for research and public engagement that I want to do, that I feel like if I spend half of my time on teaching, then that's that much less time doing research.
I mean, when you put it that way and you say that you have so many ideas and ways you want to engage the public, it does sound very genuinely derived from your internal compass. So I envy that. And I think I have some of that, but I do think I have a lot of desire to look externally for recognition and affirmation. They talk about this though, and even aside from the corporatization and the external pressures that exist, they talk about this internal sense of what they call academic shame, and they talk about the culture of excellence that we live in by virtue of being academics. That it can be difficult to share your struggles outwardly because it can feel shameful that we should always be operating at a very high level. Obviously, there are many professions like this. So I don't think it's specific to the academy. And you can imagine professions where you could get your license taken away if you weren't operating optimally because you could be putting other people's lives at risk, for example. But there is something about performing, constantly performing, that I think does really exist in the academy.
Well, yeah, but you're pointing to two different things. One is about the pressure to be constantly performing, and the other is people's recognition of our work, or people like how our work is received, right?
It's true. I guess sometimes you can work really hard, get a book contract or get an article accepted, put it out there, and then it thuds in the forest, and you don't get a sense that anyone's reading it, or that people are reading it but not discussing it, not citing it. So you're right. There are two different issues. I think for me, most of my career, I've been really focused on simply getting that contract. But there is also the question is, are people really listening? Are people caring?
Right, which actually brings us to the question of how we promote our work. Like once we've written something, how do we tell people that it exists? And some colleagues that I have, whenever they come out with a new article, they have an email list that they send it to. And I think that's nice. I mean, I don't do that. That's a lot of work, but I do send it to specific people that I think would be interested. So I have 2 peer-reviewed journal articles coming out, and I already know I'm planning to send them to a few of the people that I've talked to over the years about these ideas and people I cite in the article. And actually, I do think Google alerts have helped a lot in this. Just a few days ago, I learned about an article that cited an article that I wrote in 2010, because I have a Google alert for that article. And I learned a lot by reading this article. It actually applied my framework of ethno-linguistic repertoire to the New Testament.
Mm.
And I thought that was a really cool application. And I sent it to some colleagues that work on the New Testament. And, I think like this gets to the point in the book about the importance of community in academia. I do think the Google alert system has fostered community in new ways.
Yeah, they talk about community a lot as uh, being between the four walls of your academic department, and they talk about quiet hallways means less community. They talk less about digital communities and social network communities.
And academic conferences.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah,
there's.
they don't really talk that much. They mention it briefly, but yes, I think both are important. I think it's great to have a workplace that you go to where you will interact with people in the hallways. I think chance encounters are so important in our lives in general. Like I remember one colleague of mine, I happened to bump into her in the hallway. We were just chatting, and she told me about this new thing she was doing, which was reading responses. Every day before class, she required the students to write a few sentences in response to the reading. And I think at first I said, "Oh my gosh, that sounds like so much work because then you have to grade them." And she said, "Yeah, I don't read them that closely, but I read them." And anyway, I adopted that in my class a few years ago, and it has totally changed my teaching. It's made it that much more engaged. Like I understand the students better, I get to know them more quickly, and I really read them carefully, and I bring in quotes from these reading responses in class. Like I'll say, as Sam said, blah, blah, blah. What do you guys think about that? Or Marissa, can you tell us about your comment about this? And it's really helped. And that was because of a chance encounter, because I happened to bump into my colleague in the hallway. During COVID, when we were all at home and not bumping into colleagues in the hallway, I feel like we did miss out on a lot of that.
Absolutely. And that is another thing that I used to do is reading responses that I no longer do because AI can do reading responses very well. But I do think if you ask students to talk about what they wrote or what AI wrote on their reading response, that can certainly help mitigate it. Or have them jot down a few lines when they first come into class.
And
I don't,
then what do you do with that? That would you read that if they were writing it by hand?
well, maybe they could hand it to a friend to read out, but handwriting, this is a whole other problem. Maybe have little typewriters in class that we could.
Well, I definitely have them do turn and talks, pair shares, chevruta learning, that's a Hebrew word, Aramaic word for learning in pairs, turn to someone and talk about this question in the reading. And I'm not listening to their conversations, but then afterward, I'll point to a group and ask them what they discussed. And so there is a little pressure, like if they know I'm going to do that. So yeah, I guess I have to decide if I'm still going to do the reading responses now. I think it's also really important for students who are shy and have trouble participating in class. It's a way for me to get to know them. Yeah, I do think some students used AI for their responses, but I don't think most of them did. A lot of them would write personal things. Like I wanted them to connect it to something in their lives. So I guess I just need to be more explicit about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that. And I love think, pair, share because it takes a little heat off me. I don't like to lecture so much. I like to have a guided conversation, so it creates that dynamism. What about the fact or the point they make that reading should count? Reading
Oh,
should count
totally.
in your day of productivity. What do you think about that?
Okay, I have a lot to say about this. Yes, in fact, we in a previous episode spoke to Evyatar Zerubbabel about his book, The Clockwork Muse. And in that book, it talks about how you have to have times of writing. And for me, I feel like it needs to be times of reading and writing because they go hand in hand for me. I can't just read something and not write, I like to take notes on it and then write my thoughts about it and maybe how it might be applied to the thing that I'm currently working on. And I can't just write without reading because you need to cite previous scholarship and your work should be in conversation. I mean, obviously, all of the people who are writing about this are citing previous scholarship, but the question of whether the reading should be done during your A time or your B time, the time that you're at your best or the time that you're not at your best, I think it should be done at the time that I'm at my best. I guess part of it is that I'm a distracted reader, and it's very hard for me to read when I'm tired and when I've already spent several hours writing. So I definitely include reading as part of my prime working time, and I give myself credit for it.
Hmm.
Sometimes I don't even distinguish between reading and writing in my system of keeping track of my hours. I just say working on this project, which includes both reading and writing and thinking.
I mean, I think they're pushing back against people who are saying, sure, I'm reading as I go in order to write my article and toggling back and forth between a document and your books and citations. That's the conventional notion of quote unquote productivity. And if I just opened a book and I didn't take notes and I didn't have a document and the book wasn't even directly related to any particular article I was working on, it's just a general book in my field or even just a general book about the world, a lot of people would say that shouldn't quote unquote count.
Hmm. Yeah, I see that, and I guess I don't do that enough. I really would like to do that more. Um, for me, there tends to have to be a reason to read something. So yeah, I guess I'm not really aligned with what they're recommending yet, but it's definitely something that I'd like to work on. And even for pleasure reading, I mean, my husband reads every night before bed, and I can't because I find reading too stimulating and it's hard for me to go to sleep after that. If I've just read. So I need to just kind of chill out and not read for a while before bed. In fact, I remember a time when I was in my early years of my tenure track job when I read an article as I was falling asleep, and then I just hardly slept that night because I disagreed with the article so much that I wanted to write my rebuttal. But even beyond the academic reading, if I spend all day reading and writing, it's hard for me to do pleasure reading in the evenings, especially when children keep interrupting me.
That too, the proverbial work-life balance that is a big part of the book implicitly, if not explicitly. So what are they really saying when they talk about slow professor? I mean, I've read this book twice now. I read it when it first came out and then again for our purposes. And I kept thinking about the slow movement and I didn't really think it was about speed. But in a way, it is about speed. But really, ultimately, they define it as being more that the slow movement, whether it's slow food, which I think is where it began, and slow fashion, we know it prizes attention and pleasure. So they want research to ripen, they want periods of rest, they want open-endedness of thinking. And they're saying an open-ended way of thinking and letting ideas percolate, that can be connected or that can lead to an openness to others. So it's very philosophical what they're saying. I mean, when I think of slow food, it's not the speed, it's scratch ingredients, and you can make a scratch meal very quickly. Well, to process food can take a long time. You have to figure out the scientific ratios. You have to build a big factory. So it's not always speed, right? I don't know. What do you think? Is this about speed ultimately?
A little bit, but you're right that it's about a lot more than that. And I do resonate with the slow food movement. I love spending a long time cooking. Actually, I remember a friend of mine in grad school was into this kind of thing, and I went to her house once and she was making her own bread and pasta. And I remember thinking, oh my God, why wouldn't you just buy it at the store?
Right.
And, since then I've gotten into spending a long time cooking each meal. And, I'm really into Ottolenghi, a chef in England who has a lot of cookbooks. And I really enjoy the fact that his recipes take like a few hours to make. And so I guess for me, cooking is kind of meditative, and eating and sharing. I mean, I love how the slow food movement privileges conviviality and the idea of just sitting around, lounging, talking to your friends around a table and enjoying good food together. And I like how this book, The Slow Professor, applies that to academia. And I feel like we should all be spending more time eating good food together and talking about our academic ideas.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that ultimately sums up just being a bit more intentional, more intercommunal, less competitive, and probably a little softer with ourselves too.
Yeah, and I think one issue with this book is that it has a lot of critiques, but it doesn't really give a lot of solutions on the policy level. Like it says we shouldn't focus so much on X, but how do you not focus on X from the policy perspective, especially when you have to be an accredited university and the accreditation bodies actually ask for learning outcomes and they ask for, metrics about scholarship, then what can we do within that system? Or how can we try to change that system?
Yeah, they're certainly probably focusing more on what we can do within that system with maybe a spillover effect to the idea that the system might naturally change if everyone involved in it slows it down a little bit. Then the metrics will naturally change.
So, what did you think about the idea of taking time away from your work to help you in your work and in your mental health more broadly?
I think we naturally do it in teaching, presuming when you have your summer without teaching, there's a natural break where we refuel. But one thing I really appreciate that they said is that they want us to move from the language of producing and instead to incorporate two other verbs, contemplating or conversing with. So if it was a weekend, or some people observe a Sabbath, or if it was part of a summer, a family vacation, you could still converse. You could converse in your head, you could converse with people around you about topics that might be germane to your research. And that could kind of square the circle.
Yeah, I think about this on multiple levels. I think about it on an hourly level, that I like to work for about an hour and then walk around my house to stretch my legs. And even in that walking around the house, I might get a new idea. Then on a daily level, I really do prioritize exercise every day. And during my exercise, I try not to listen to a podcast or talk to someone else, and just and in fact, in a song that I wrote, I'll have to share it with our podcast audience here at some point. I say that inspiration comes when I single task.
Mm.
Single tasking, the idea of doing just one thing.
Mhm.
I think that's been really helpful for me. I learned about it on a podcast, and I really like the idea of taking Shabbat. That I don't check my email and do work related to my work between sundown Friday night and sundown Saturday night, and usually not until Sunday sometime. And I think, I mean, that might sound um, revolutionary in some
Mm.
ways. But I think it's something that we have a long history of, and we should go back to, the idea of a Sabbath, Shabbat. And also, I take vacations, and on my vacations, I don't bring my work. I just vacate. That is the history of that word. The etymology is to vacate. You're never fully vacating because you're always there. You're always thinking. Your mind is always there. But often ideas come when you do that. In fact, I remember once I dropped my daughter off at camp, and I had a few days with just myself in a hotel room, and I would just go walk around in the woods, and it was Shabbat, so I wasn't doing work, and I was just walking around the woods, and I got an idea related to my teaching that I then sat down and wrote about, so I wouldn't forget it. So I did, I guess, a little work, but it was only work because it came to me. It came to my mind when I was not trying to work.
So really clearing space to think.
Yeah, do you do that too? Do you take vacations where you don't do any work intentionally?
Yes, but usually because I'm too busy being on vacation, not because I'm being quiet. So I
Well,
think
you're right. I guess that's the case with me too. I'm not very good at just lounging around doing nothing. I tend to pack my vacations with as much as I can because I'm in that place and I'm not going to be there again for a long time. So I've got to experience it while I'm there, right?
exactly. But yeah, keeping time to just be open.
So one more thing that I want to talk about before we wrap it up is the idea of getting pleasure from our work. Do you feel like you get pleasure from your work?
When the writing is flowing, it does and can feel pleasurable. And when I'm reading a book that I'm quite engaged in that's related to my work, it can feel pleasurable. More and more formal academic writing is not feeling pleasurable to me, either to do it or to read it. So, what I'm really involved in now is producing and reading creative nonfiction, and that feels much more pleasurable.
And do you still feel like you have to do the parts that don't feel pleasurable to you?
At this point, I can do less formal academic writing and do writing that is reaching the kinds of audiences I want to reach, which is a broad audience. And so I feel comfortable that my form can shift to nonfiction or creative nonfiction. And with reading, still trying to read a mix of things, but it depends what project I'm working on. And teaching can be pleasurable when a class is going well and when I'm in flow. And I think they talk about flow state. A lot of people are now talking about flow state where it's not too challenging that you feel lost or cognitively stuck, and it's not too easy that you feel bored. It's that middle state.
Yeah, that resonated with me. I do feel a lot of pleasure from my work, from my academic writing and my non-academic writing, my public engagement, For my teaching, like you said, it depends if the class is going well. I've had some classes that I just love because it's just a good combination of people, and often it's one or two people that make it really good or not good, right? But I'm really going to try to enjoy my teaching and even my grading or marking more than I used to, because I always used to say the grading is my least favorite part of my job, but I don't have to feel that way, right? I can make it so that the assignments are fun for me to listen to or read, or I mean, yeah, watch their videos of them interviewing each other, right? I can make that a fun thing for me. But I just want to say before we end that I, based on this reading, changed what I'm going to be doing with my accountability partner, because every week we send each other our goals and to what extent we accomplished the goals from last week. But now we're going to add a new component, which is how much we enjoyed each thing and how fulfilled we feel by our work. And that, I think, will be helpful for us to gauge what we need to do differently.
I think that's excellent. It's a sign. It's about listening to the internal feedback of what's working and what isn't based on pleasure. I think we need to bring pleasure back.
Exactly. Well, Mira, thanks so much for talking about this. I really learned a lot from the book and from talking to you about it.
Yeah, likewise. Looking forward to our next chat.
The Peer Review podcast is produced and hosted by Sarah Bunin Benor and Mira Sucharov. Talia Ehrenberg is assistant producer and editor. The music is written and performed by the Galactic Ambassadors. Support for this podcast comes from a faculty grant from Hebrew Union College. If you would like to sponsor an episode, you can reach us at peerreview@huc.edu. You can join the conversation on Facebook at Peer Review, Cultivating Creativity and Fulfillment in Academia. Thank you for listening.